Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Let me first off say I'm very sorry about missing last week. I was in New York with some friends of mine and a whole big thing, and so I was not here last week to do this. However, we are going to be doing it this week, and I'm very excited about it. Because as I said, if you remember in my previous ones, this chapter is one of my favorite parts of the story of David, and it just shows so much about David. So we're going to read in 1 Samuel chapter 24. We're going to read verse 8, and then we're going to pray, and we're going to start in on it. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much, God, for this day. Thank you, Lord, that you've given us so much. Lord, please continue to give us. Give me your power, dear Lord, to speak. Give me your words. Give me your wisdom, dear Lord. I need those in order to speak out your word. Lord, please help me. And please help it not to fall on deaf ears. Please help people to listen. In Jesus' name, amen. Starting in verse 1. And it came to pass when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gadi. Then Saul took 3,000 excuse me, I'm sorry. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepcotes by the way. There was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet. And David and his men remained inside the cave. And the men of David said to him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it seemed good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. He said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with these words, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. David also rose afterward and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, My lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. This is one of my favorite stories of David. One, it shows that David is not only all of the things that we've talked about so far, which has just been how great David is, how much of a servant David is, all those things. David was also a ninja. I swear. Saul was in this cave. It never says Saul went to sleep. Saul went in to cover his feet. Some people say Saul was sleeping, he was taking a nap. They're probably right. But the Bible doesn't specifically say that. Sometimes I like to think that he wasn't. He goes into this cave, and David and his men were hiding in this cave. So Saul went into this cave, and David's men were all like, He's here. The Lord has delivered him unto you. You can kill him. You can take his life right now, and no one would be the wiser. And you would get to rule Israel. And David didn't do that. I probably would have done that. Remember, Saul has been chasing David for however long. At this point, he is chasing him. He's trying to kill him. He has taken his best friend from him in Jonathan. He has taken his wife away from him in Michael. He's exiled him. He's on the run. The man who was once captain of thousands of people is now on the run from the king that put him in command. So, in all honesty, if it was me, I probably would have tried to kill Saul. But David didn't do that. David instead says, and he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. David would not lift up his hand. David would not kill Saul. Just way back in 1 Samuel, I think it's chapter 11, maybe? Chapter 9. way back in 1 Samuel chapter 9, Saul was anointed as king. Samuel anointed, he poured the horn of oil out on Saul's head, and Saul rose, and he united Israel. And he was the anointed of the Lord. And for that reason, way back then, David, now, even though Saul had fallen off, even though Saul wasn't with God anymore, even though Saul hadn't walked with God like Saul should have walked with God, even though all of that, and how wrong of a king he was to chase David, his servant, who had done nothing, despite all of that, David, who would have been, who if he killed Saul, would have essentially started a civil war. We see that later. Not that David does kill Saul ever, that doesn't happen. But after Saul's death, we see that Israel plunges into civil war, the house of David versus Saul's son. We're going to see that in a bit. But David elected to not do it because God set Saul up. And this is amazing, what David did. And we're going to keep reading now for a little bit. And David said to Saul, "Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt? Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how that the Lord had delivered thee today into mine hand in the cave. And some bade me kill thee, but mine eyes spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth mine hand against the Lord, against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in mine hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not. Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand. And I have not sinned against thee, yet thou huntest my soul to take. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. As saith the proverb of the ancients, wickedness proceedeth from the wicked, but my hand shall not be upon thee. After whom is the king of Israel come out? And after whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see, and plead my cause, and deliver me out of thine hand." So Saul leaves the cave, and David walks out as the cave after Saul. And he gives this speech to Saul. That was basically David said, I could have killed you. God delivered you into my hand. I could have killed you, but I didn't. And yet you still hunt me to take my soul. Yet you still are trying to kill me. Yet you have 3,000 men of Israel. 3,000 chosen men of Israel. These weren't just soldiers. These were Saul's chosen men. These were probably elite soldiers. These were the soldiers that went one step above. These were the soldiers that proved that they were better than the other soldiers. 3,000 chosen men. David said, even though you took your soldiers out here, even though you've been hunting me, even though you've been pursuing me for however long, I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. You see David's amazing loyalty right here. And again, the Bible is incredible because of how relevant it still is. The Bible is, well, obviously it's my favorite book. If it wasn't my favorite book, I need to get my priorities in order. But the Bible is an incredible book because even though this story was written so long ago, and even though we have what has been carried on to now, even though this happened, Jesus came 2,000 years ago, depending on who you ask, depends on how far back this was, but a minimum of 5,000 years ago, absolute minimum, and I don't think it was that low. I think it was probably close to 6,000, 7,000 years ago. This happened. And even though this happened that long ago, we can still read about it, and not only that, we can still draw comparisons. We can still see how Saul misused his leadership, had abused his leadership. And we can still see how that leadership figure has a David. And we see how David, who even though he had been mistreated by that leadership, even though he had been misused, abused by that leadership, the leadership had literally tried to kill him. Even though that happened, we still see David's loyalty to Saul. We see that first part, abused leadership, more often than we ever should. Whenever leadership was abused, especially if it's leadership that was given by God, is abused, that is so sad. That is awful. And we might even see that second part happen from time to time. An individual is abused and mistreated by that leadership for no reason. We see that too. What we rarely see, rarely see, is that abused and mistreated individual still being loyal to the leadership that God has put in place. Now, understand, I'm not saying stay in a bad situation. David did not do that. David ran from Saul. David did not stay and take it. He did not stay and get slaughtered. He did not do that. David ran from Saul. I'm not saying stay in a bad situation. I'm saying when God has set up leadership, there is never a reason not to be at least loyal to that leadership. I lived in New York for a period of time. And this was when I was very young, 7 to 10 years old. So about 3 years I lived in New York. And while we were there, we were at church. I'm not going to mention any names. I'm not going to mention anything like that. But we were at this church in New York. And my dad helped at the church. He taught in the college that was there. And he basically, to make a long story short, he was there. We were there for 3 years. About 2.5 years while we were there, the pastor that had been there stepped down, and a new pastor came into leadership there. And he was pastor. And I don't know all of it. Like I said, I was probably about 9, 10 when this happened. But I can tell you this. We did not part in the best of terms. My dad was not treated like he should have. My mom was not treated as she should have. And we left. In non-wonderful terms. That's what happened. To this day, this was about 10 years ago at this point. To this day, I've never heard my dad bash that man. Even though he was mistreated, even though he wasn't handled like he should have been, even though the leadership was abused in that situation, I have never heard my dad just say, "Oh, that so-and-so pastor, he doesn't even deserve to be a pastor. He doesn't even deserve what the office that he has." I've never heard my dad say that. You know what that is? That's loyalty. No, he didn't stay in a bad situation. He did not do that. But he was still loyal, even though he was mistreated, even though he was put in that bad situation. And I love what David said at the end here. The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and you. So I'm not going to lift my hand up against you. You've pursued me without cause. You've mistreated me. You've tried to kill me. You've done all these things. I am not going to do it. Let the Lord judge between me and you. My hand's not up against you. Out of the wicked proceeds wickedness. I will, and my hand shall not be upon it, as David said. And David's hand was not upon it. David kept the Lord. And that is amazing because he respected. I don't think David respected Saul. I think David respected the fact that God put him there. God did. And because God put him there, David did not have, David had killed before. David was a man of war. Later on in the Bible, when David is trying to build the temple for God, God says, you can't build my temple. You're a bloody man. You have blood on your hands. You cannot build my temple. And that's because David was a warrior king. He fought, and he fought, and he fought, and he fought. David had killed before. This would have been no different. But David had not, because it would not look like the same thing as well. Look at David's loyalty, astounding. And then we have next. And it came to pass when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. And thou hast showed this day how that thou hast dealt well with me. For as much as when the Lord hath delivered me into thine hand, thou killedst me not. If man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good, for that thou hast done unto me this day. And now behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. Swear now therefore unto me by the Lord that thou wilt not cut off my seed after me, that thou wilt not destroy my name after my father's house. And David sware unto Saul. Saul went home. David and his men gat them up unto the Lord. That ends the chapter. And Saul's response was one. He was sorrowful for what he had done. He had regretted hunting down David. And he and David made a covenant unto Saul that day. Because Saul knew he was coming after him. Saul knew David was to be the next king. So he said, when you're the next king, don't kill my family. Now that was worthy of note, because generally, when the king had been established, if it had been a king that was not of the same line, sometimes even if it was of the same line, the next king, which David would not have been from the line of Saul, David was not in line for the throne in any sort of way other than God anointed him. And so David, if he took the throne to solidify his position on the throne, it would have been typical of him to destroy the house of Saul, so that nobody in the house of Saul could make a claim to the throne, could try and garner support, so that the descendant of Saul should have the throne. And David's loyalty gets to another level. David says, I won't do that. Understanding that in the future that might put him in a precarious situation. If a child of Saul came and said, I want the throne, that would have put David in a precarious situation. David, even though accepting that, said, I won't kill him. And this is, like I said, this chapter, it's not long, it's 22 verses. That's it. It doesn't take a long time to read. But the amount, what David does in this chapter is amazing. If any of us were in that situation, and this man might have been mistreating us and abusing us and even trying to kill us, this entire time was presented with the opportunity that David had. Saul came into the cave that David was hiding in. Do you know what the odds of that were? That didn't happen. That was God. And God gave David this opportunity and said, David, what will you do? And David said, I will not lift up my hand against the Lord. I will do this. I refuse to kill Saul. Even though he's done all of this, even though he's gone so far, even though he's absolutely been a horrible king for this period of time, I will not lift up my hand against him. Amazing chapter. David's loyalty is just incredible in this chapter. And then the last part of this chapter, I love these things that just, right at the end of the chapter, that just grabbed my attention. And David sware unto Saul, and Saul went home. But David and his men gat them up unto the hole. Saul had forgiven David. David had forgiven Saul. Saul had promised he wasn't going to kill him anymore. David had mended their broken friendship, their broken trust, as much as it could be at this point. And Saul went home. Do you think that David could not have returned to Jerusalem? Do you think that David could have not gone back to the same situation that David could have gone back? Do you think that that wasn't an option for David? It absolutely was an option for David. David would have been welcomed in Jerusalem. Jonathan was in Jerusalem. He had his old men in Jerusalem, his old army in Jerusalem, his brothers in arms were in Jerusalem. His wife was in Jerusalem. So why didn't David go to Jerusalem? I think there was a couple reasons. One, David was not going to put himself in the same situation as he was before with Saul. He was not going to put himself in a position where Saul would become increasingly jealous of him. He would not put himself in that situation, which was wise. Which was very wise. It is not wise for a man if a man has been abusing you, mistreating you, and similar to the situation that was going on, and then whatever happens, and for whatever reason, the fences get mended a little bit. It is not wise to go back to before that led to the abuse and the mistreatment. That is not wise. David knew that, so David did not do that. Very, very wise on his part. The second reason why I think David didn't do that, remember David's best friend, David's wife, David's brothers in arms in Jerusalem. David's men were not welcome in Jerusalem. If you just turn back just a little bit. David therefore departed thence. 1 Samuel 22, verse 1. David therefore departed whence he escaped to a cave in Adullam. When his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and became captain over them. These men came to David for a reason. These men came to David because he helped fulfill them. They were in debt. They were in distress. These men weren't welcome where they were before. So they were with David. And David went back to Jerusalem. He would have been abandoning all of the men that had fought with him, that had fought for him. David would have been leaving. So David did not go back to Jerusalem, even though I'm sure that was tense. Even though I'm sure that's what David wanted to do. He didn't. Because that's what was right. I read this quote that I have in my Bible. I'm going to read it again today. I'm going to get out of here about 5 minutes or so. Learn to say no to something you want to do something that you need to do. Learn to say no to something you want to do something that you need to do. And that is what David did. David wanted to go to Jerusalem. David had his best friend in Jerusalem. The person with whom his soul was knit in Jonathan. His wife was in Jerusalem, Michael. That's what he wanted to do. But no. This is what I need to do. And even though that's hard, that's so hard sometimes, it's what you need to do. This is a tough message. This is tough to live. This is tough to preach. But it doesn't change it for me. Pray and then guys can get out of here. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this day, dear Lord. I thank you, Lord, that you've given us so much. You keep giving. God, thank you, Lord, that we have that. We need that, God. Lord, please help us to take this message to heart, Lord. Like I said, this is hard. This is hard. But God, we need it. Thank you, God, so much for everything that you've given us. In Jesus' name, we All right, everybody, we're out of here about 6 minutes early. Thank you so much for listening.